Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're going to jump right into one of the absolute most fascinating and honestly highly influential frameworks in all of human psychology. We are looking at Sigmund Freud's topographic map of the mind. But hey, we aren't just looking at some boring, static map here. Freud actually envisioned the human psyche as a literal battleground of conflicting desires. It's this intense place where our most primal urges are constantly clashing with harsh reality and really strict societal rules. So think of it as a constant, invisible war, and it's happening inside all of us, literally every single day.
Okay, let's dive into our blueprint for this explainer. We're going to cover 1, mapping the human mind, 2, the id, primal desires, 3, the ego, facing reality, 4, the superego, societal rules, 5, the eternal inner conflict, and finally, 6, the cost of civilization.
All right, section 1, mapping the human mind.
So, Freud was a thinker who absolutely loved dualistic explanations. To make any sense of the sheer chaos of human emotion, he mapped the mind out by dividing it into distinct, competing territories. He called these maps topographical. Now, it's super important to understand right off the bat that these aren't physical locations. You can't just put a brain in an MRI scanner and point to the id or the ego. Instead, think of this topography as a sort of whiteboard layout of our psyche. It's a conceptual space where these totally different forces live, interact, and constantly negotiate with one another to actually form our identities.
And that brings us to a rather unsettling question, really. Who is actually in charge inside your head? We all walk around with this cozy illusion that our conscious, rational selves are firmly in the driver's seat. But Freud's map suggests that our conscious mind is just a tiny, tiny fraction of the story. The real forces driving our behavior? Well, they're often entirely hidden from us. Moving on to section 2, the id, primal desires. Let's take a look at the first character on our mental whiteboard, the chaotic, completely unconscious id, or in Freud's original German, das Es, which literally translates to the it. When we're born, we are basically just a giant mass of id. It's the ultimate storehouse of our absolute deepest desires and needs. Think of the id like a really demanding infant that knows absolutely no boundaries. Its entire vocabulary basically consists of the phrase, I want. It doesn't plan for the future, it definitely doesn't care about politeness, and it seeks instant gratification without any concern for the consequences whatsoever. I mean, when an infant is hungry, it doesn't stop to think about whether it's an appropriate time to eat, right? It simply demands to be fed, right now. Now, what's really interesting about this is how perfectly this quote captures the id's absolute refusal to accept reality. Freud said, the unconscious knows no time but the present, no answer but yes. The id literally completely ignores logic. It completely ignores time. It simply operates on the pure, unadulterated drive for pleasure and the immediate release of any tension.
Which brings us to section 3, the ego, facing reality.
As that demanding infant grows, it quickly realizes that the outside world isn't going to instantly satisfy every single demand. A parent isn't always instantly there the second you cry. And this frustration brings us to our second character on the whiteboard, the ego, or das Ich, the I. If the id is the demanding infant, you can kind of describe the ego as a highly stressed-out middle manager. It's our conscious self, and it has to look at all those chaotic demands of the id and tell it, hey, hold back, you gotta wait. It's constantly negotiating between what we fundamentally crave and what's actually practically possible in the real world. As Freud put it, normally respect for reality gains the day. The ego basically operates on what he called the reality principle. It realizes that self-preservation and survival are ultimately way more important than instant gratification, so it forces us to delay our pleasure. We constantly make deals with ourselves, right? We wait to eat until we've actually cooked the food. We go to a boring job so we can afford fun weekend plans. Basically, the ego is what keeps us alive.
Section 4, the superego, societal rules.
But you see, the mind isn't just a simple negotiation between our desires and physical reality. A third incredibly heavy character enters the chat, the punishing superego. And this brilliantly illustrates exactly where our sense of morality comes from. The superego, or the over-I, is our self-critical conscience. It acts as this stern, completely uncompromising internal judge that's watching our every single move. While the id is yelling, I want, and the ego is saying, okay, let's figure out how, the superego screams, you shouldn't. It internalizes the high moral standards of our parents and our culture, and its absolute favorite weapon to use against us, guilt.
Freud noted that this inner voice of judgment begins very specifically with our parents. As helpless children, our absolute greatest fear is losing our parents' love or, being punished by them. But as we grow up, that external parental authority gets dragged inside our own minds. And eventually, it expands to encompass all of society's rules. We're talking teachers, laws, religion, and the everyday expectations of our fellow citizens.
So if we trace this developmental arc visually, we can see exactly how our minds become increasingly crowded and restricted as we age. We start out as pure, boundless id. Then, as toddlers, we're governed by the external fear of punishment. But by the time we hit adulthood, that punishment has become entirely internal. The superego is fully installed, and we're subjected to constant, self-imposed guilt, sometimes for things we only think about doing. Crazy, right?
This brings us to Section 5, the eternal inner conflict.
This whole setup sets the stage for an actual daily battle, where these forces violently clash, creating the psychological friction that Freud believed was the root of all our anxieties and neuroses. Let's look at how this builds by comparing the exact mechanisms pulling our behavior in completely opposite directions. On one side, we have the pleasure principle. That's the id, relentlessly driving for instant gratification and the release of tension. And then on the other side, the reality principle, the ego desperately trying to delay that pleasure just to survive in the real world.
So the poor ego is just caught in a perpetual crossfire. It has to serve two very, very demanding masters. Let's look at a super relatable micro scenario. Okay, your alarm goes off at 6 a.m. Your it screams, "I want to stay in this warm bed forever, sleep." Your ego rationally says, well, you need to get up and go to work or you're going to get fired and starve. And if you do decide to hit snooze, your superego instantly chimes in with immense guilt. You are lazy, you're irresponsible, and you're a failure. Every single decision we make is a brutal internal negotiation.
Section 6. The cost of civilization. So what happens when you take this internal mental conflict and scale it all the way up to shape all of human society? Freud tackled this exact idea in his later works, writing this deeply provocative line. Every individual is virtually an enemy of civilization, though civilization is supposed to be an object of universal human interest. There is profound irony here. We build civilization to keep ourselves safe, to cooperate, and to thrive. Yet the very society keeping us safe requires us to brutally repress our own deepest instinctual desires. Basically, to live together, we have to hold back our id. Freud pointed out that there were three main sources of human suffering. First, the superior powers of nature, things like storms and earthquakes. Second, the feebleness of our own bodies, sickness and aging. Now, we use our intelligence to build shelters and invent medicine to fight off those first two. But it's the third point, our social ties built on regulations and repression, that actually guarantees ongoing human dissatisfaction. We can never fully cure the pain of interacting with each other.
So the crucial takeaway here is that civilized society acts as a massive, shared superego. For a community to survive, it demands the universal renunciation of our instinctual urges. We literally can't just take what we want or lash out every time we get angry. We have to sublimate those energies. Meaning, human neurosis and guilt aren't just an illness. They are the inevitable tax we all have to pay just to live together in a cooperative society. Which leaves us with this final, incredibly striking question. If civilization requires the constant repression of our deepest desires, and it installs a punishing superego in all of us just to keep us in line, is the absolute price of a polite, safe society our own true happiness? It's a thought that completely reframes the invisible compromises you make every single day. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. I really hope this whiteboard journey through the mind leaves you thinking deeply about the voices inside your own head.